whatever reason you need wireframe. And then, so here's kind of how scaling works in Inkscape, and I went over this a little bit before, where you select an item, and you get this control where it shows the arrows. This is to show you that that item is actively selected. When you mouse over any corner, it'll light up green, and it'll let you scale on that axis. So here, I clicked here, and I dragged open. Okay, you can see how it grew from the left. Now here is where I held down Shift, and I did the same exact thing, and you can see it grew from the center. So that's just kind of basic scaling in Inkscape. One thing to know about when you select objects, when you first click it, it's going to look like this, and the arrows are going to be straight. If you click it one more time, those arrows are going to go rounded, and that's the rotation control. Now, I don't really go over rotation control in this because you don't typically use that a lot in mockups, but it's good to know about. And the same thing, that's how text works. And if I didn't have that little lock icon clicked off, when I scaled this up, it'd be like all flat or all too tall or something like that. So that's another reason why you want that, especially for text, because when you've kind of stretched out your text, it really is noticeable. Okay, so now Control D is something that I didn't even think I used it that much, and then like I had someone actually watch me do an example mockup, and they're like, "You're constantly hitting that. You're constantly hitting that." So I kind of discovered that way that Control D is sort of my secret to making mockups very quickly. So, and I kind of will show this to you visually. So, say I drew out this little rectangle, and this is kind of to represent like a photo, right, and an item. So whatever the item is or the photo is there, here's the price. So I select this whole thing, and I do that by clicking down and dragging a lasso, and it selects everything that I have highlighted. Then what I do is hold Control D, and when I hit Control D, that copied, duplicated object is going to be pasted on the stack above it, what I copied, directly on top of it, which is great because that helps you do exact alignments. So all I do is I take that, and then I hit the down arrow, and it perfectly aligns it in one line down. And then I click it, I might hit it like 1, 2, 3. And I'll say that in my head, 1, 2, 3. Okay, now it's 3 steps down, perfectly aligned. So now we go to the next one. And I've built out 4 of them. I'll select all 4 by clicking, dragging the selection tool, hit Control D, and then hit Shift, 1, 2, 3. Now I have 8 items. Then I select the 8 items, I hit Shift, or I hit Control D, then Shift, 1, 2, 3. Actually, I might have to do 6 at that point, and then I have a field of 16 items, and like I went from 4 to 16 in 2 copy operations. So this is how you build out a lot of things in your mockup and make them look nice and consistent. And it works with text too. So like this is how I did the sidebar and sort of the sample mockup I drew up for this presentation. I just wrote out the first thing I wanted in that right sidebar, and then I just did Control D, 1, 2, 3, Control D, 1, 2, 3, Control D, 1, 2, 3. And then I went back through and I double-clicked it with the text tool. I started writing out what I wanted the different things to be, and then there they are, all perfectly aligned. The same font, the same color. When you do Control D, it inherits the font, it inherits the size, it inherits the color, any style properties you have attached to it.
So, do you know about row and amendment?
Yes, but okay. I did not put this in here because I thought maybe it's a little bit too complex. I don't know.
I was just curious.
Yeah, the nice thing is that if you follow as Control D, you don't have to use that quite as much.
Well, the same thing goes in that case. You just do Control D like 10 times. You highlight all of them, and you can say align them in the middle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
This is simpler, definitely.
Yeah.
I was just curious because I noticed you were doing a lot. So.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good thing. Like if you start with this method, the align and grid align is a good thing to grow into. Yeah.
That's true.
Is there a way to duplicate but link it? Like, so if you change the color of one, you can change the other?
There is. I don't go over it in this presentation, but it's called cloning. And basically what you do is instead of hitting Control D, you hit Alt D. And it does that. The reason that I didn't use that method instead is particularly with text, it's problematic because I think it inherits the text too. And you have to go into the SVG editor to modify the text. So it's a little wonky. But one cool thing we've actually done using that is you can take this text and you can make it all blingy and have drop shadows and glowing and pony sparkles everywhere. And then you save it as an SVG. And if you clone it, what you can do is you can then make a copy of it, and when you go into the SVG text editor, you can write the translation. So then what that enables you to do is you can kind of translate the text in kind of a very scriptable manner, but it comes out with all the sparkle ponies and everything. So the translator doesn't have to know how to do the sparkle ponies on their own. They just write that in the translation file, and it just works. So it's kind of neat the way clones allow you to do that. Okay, so now kind of building on that little, using Control D to build out different objects, you can do it to duplicate entire screens. And this is sort of kind of a little bridge into my workflow when I do mock-ups. I'll start out with the first screen, and I'll be like, okay, I like this general model of the screen. I'll select the entire screen, hit Control D, move it down, and then I'll start modifying it to match, which is really good because now I have most of the framework of the screen already drawn out with rectangles and text, and all I have to do is like here, this is tab number 1, and it's sort of the overview browse. Here's tab number 1, but I made it a details view, and then here I moved it so it's tab number 2. But I didn't have to redraw everything, so everything's all consistent and aligned. Everything uses the same fonts, the same colors, with a minimum of work. All I had to do is design the diff. I didn't have to redesign it from scratch. So that's kind of my process. And depending on how the UI works, I'll do it vertically, up and down, or I'll do it horizontally, left to right. Typically, if it's a web page design, I do it up and down, and then I'll use the left and right sides of the screen for like little notes, or like I might say, you know, this is one way to design it, but maybe I have an alternative in mind. Then I'll Control D it over here, and I'll kind of feel free to muck around over there and just play around and see if there's a better alternative. If it's a wizard-based UI where it has a linear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 path, then I'll design it horizontally, left to right. And what I do sometimes is, for example, and I'll show you this later, but like if it's Anaconda when you're installing Fedora, there's a new redesign that we've done, and there's sort of an advanced workflow and a basic workflow. So what I did with those mockups is I put the basic along the top left to right, and then the advanced is along the bottom left to right. So it's kind of a different way to lay out the page. But did you have a question?
Yeah, the tab, is that just 2 rectangles and you erase the?
Yes.
Okay, just making
And I
sure.
can show you that too. It's really easy to do.
I was
It's
just
a
making
little
sure there
trick.
wasn't like some other object somewhere that I wasn't
No.
aware of. Okay.
I'd say the cool thing about duplicating the dialogues like this is that if you think about those, like that whole dialogue as an object, then you could save that out as a PNG, and you know they're going to come out the same size, and when you like slideshow it, it
Exactly.
looks like it's
Exactly.
these or.
Although with some of these I cheated and I made them longer.
No, like,
So, but like with the Anaconda mockups, it was great because they're all exactly the same size. So, okay, so this is kind of just a visual demonstration. When you're moving items, if you hit Alt and you click 40 times, so I selected the item, I hit Control D, I held down Alt, and I hit the right key 40 times. That's how far it moved. Then I let go of everything. I selected this, I hit the right key 40 times, and that's how far it moved. Here, I held down Shift, and then hit the right key, and I hit it 40 times, and that's how far it moved. So that kind of gives you an idea of sort of distances and how you can fine tune. What I usually do, and I kind of went over this a little bit before, but when I'm moving items around with my mockup, I'll use Shift to kind of give it approximate, and then I'll let go, or I'll even hold down Alt to align it perfectly. One thing to know about when you hold down Alt and use the arrow keys, it only moves it by 1 pixel. So this is really fine adjustment. Like it might be you accidentally dragged it out with your mouse and you can't get it back so it's perfectly aligned. So you use Alt to kind of perfectly align it. So that's a little cool to do when you're doing this. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about using the grouping tool to organize your mockups. So it basically takes many different objects and makes them behave as if they are one object. So you can see here I have 999 as one object, I have the rectangle, and I have the item text block. So you can see now if I just had those arranged like that and I clicked on it and moved, it would only move item because that's not, it didn't select the whole thing. One way that you can move these without grouping them is, again, what I said before, where you take the selector tool and you drag it out so it selects the whole thing. But this makes your mockup sort of a little bit of a minefield, where if I had a row of 16 of these guys, like I showed you before, then it's kind of hard, like, okay, I want to select just this guy, but oh no, I dragged the mouse too far. It's a bit of a minefield because it makes it too easy to select one you don't want. So an easier way to do that is make each one of those little guys a group. So all you do is you drag the whole thing, you hit Control G, and then it's grouped, and it behaves as if it's one object. And one little word of advice is do this before you start duplicating all over the place, because it sucks to kind of drag and group 16 individual little guys. So And of course you can ungroup too. And generally, what I do is I use the grouping tool as sort of a, I don't want to screw up stuff accidentally, so I'm going to use this to kind of lock it into place. So for example, when I showed you I had the 3 mock-ups, right, and they were just full screens. What I'll do is when I work on that first mock-up and I'm done with it, I'll select the whole thing and I'll group it, and then I'll copy it. And then I'll ungroup the copy and I'll start working with that. So it's almost like that first one is locked. If I make a stray mouse click, it's not going to take a little checkbox and suddenly just throw it off the screen, because it's an entire unit. And if an entire screen gets kind of stray mouse clicked away, that's a lot more noticeable than a little checkbox. Because it's really annoying to like go through all this, and then you export your mockups and you're showing them to somebody, and then oh, the checkbox is missing. That kind of sucks. So I use group to kind of make sure that kind of stuff doesn't happen. And as I finish, I'll group that one, copy it, then ungroup it to work with it, group it, and that kind of just locks into place and keeps things neat. All right, so now we're going to give it a try. And we actually have time to do so that's great. All right. Of course, I don't have a lot of screen real estate on here, but if anybody has a laptop, you might want to open it and open up Inkscape and follow along. And I'm just going to hit F11 to go into full screen mode so that you can see a bit more. Let me see if I can find some toolbars. Okay. So the first thing that I'm going to do is hit 1. And what that does is it gives me sort of a 1-to-1 ratio, so I know when I'm drawing stuff, I'm drawing it at the actual scale it will show on screen. Then what I start doing is I will draw out a rectangle. Wow. Inkscape saves the settings that you last used, so when you first draw something out, you might have to massage it a little bit. So I'm going to select white for the background color just by clicking down here. And then I'm going to hold down Shift and select black so the border is black. I'm also actually going to go Control-Shift-F